These are the times that try men's souls. With those unforgettable words, Thomas Paine lit a fire in the hearts and minds of patriots during one of the darkest times of the American Revolution. First published on December 19th, 1776, The American Crisis was more than just a mere essay. It was a rallying cry that turned despair into victory. And it was filled with all kinds of timeless wisdom that we can all learn from today. But first of all, before getting to all those juicy details, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, December 16th, 2024. Thank you for being here. Let's kick it off again with those immortal words from the author of Common Sense. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier, wrote Paine, and the sunshine patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. And we're going to get into some of the important messages from this important essay that is rarely covered in very much detail. But before that, I think it's important to understand, well, why was he writing this in the first place? And Thomas Paine told us himself in 1782, he said, well, things were not going well at all. And that is a huge understatement. He said it was a period of distresses, a crisis of danger, a crisis rather of danger than of hope. There is no description can do it justice. And even the actors in it, looking back upon the scene, are surprised how they got through and at a loss to account for those powers of the mind and springs of animation by which they withstood the force of accumulated misfortune. So we're going to do our best. We can't do it justice by describing it according to Paine, and he was probably right. Here from the Sons of the American Revolution, they give us a bit of an overview of what was going down, even though we can't understand what it was like to be there in that moment. They write, during the fall of 1776, the Continental Army was driven out of New York and across New Jersey. After crossing the Delaware River into Pennsylvania, George Washington's army was exhausted, waiting for reinforcements because people were not signing up. And then people, when their enlistment time, their commission was done, they were not re-upping. So they were losing a lot of men. They were waiting for reinforcements and hoping for another chance to attack the British who were encamped on the Jersey side of the river. The American cause, they say, was looking very uncertain at this point. Again, another understatement. Washington's army seemed to be shattered. I think that's a good way to describe it. The British were a stone's throw from capturing Philadelphia. We know they burned down John Dickinson's house there, thinking he was the king of America. Strange how they got these things. And they forced the Continental Congress to flee to Baltimore. 11,000 soldiers left the army and went home because their commissions had come to an end, and a bunch more were set to leave on December 31st. And this is a good summary. Patriots everywhere were disillusioned and uncertain about the future, and it was a mess. Even George Washington himself understood how bad things were. And here in a letter to his cousin Lund Washington, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. This is somewhere December 10th-ish, 1776. He said, your imagination can scarce extend to a situation more distressing than mine. Our only dependence now is upon the speedy enlistment of a new army. He needed all kinds of fresh blood, but people weren't eager to sign up because they were getting smoked. They were really losing pretty bad. He said, if this fails us, I think the game will be pretty well up. I mean, if you think about the timing of this, July 4th, 1776 wasn't that long ago, barely 6 months in, and he's thinking, if we don't get something, the game is over. We're done. He said, as from disaffection and want of spirit and fortitude, the inhabitants, instead of resistance, are offering submission and taking protections from General Howe in Jersey. So he was seeing the people saying, oh, well, I'm not going to die for this, but maybe we can work something out instead. Here's Thomas Paine writing to Samuel Adams about the time. This is some years later in 1803. He called it the Black Times of 1776, and he thought that this was a time when it was necessary the country should be strongly animated, and he certainly got to work on that. I'm not going to go into the history of how he wrote this over a period of weeks, but let's get right to, again, the American crisis. It was a series of them. This was the first. He said, tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. So he's diving right into this, pointing out that, like, oh man, we are fighting tyranny. We are fighting the biggest empire in history. And this is not going to be easy. But the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. He said, what we obtain too cheap, we esteem too lightly. 'Tis dearness only that gives everything its value. Heaven, he said, knows how to put a proper price upon its goods, and it would be strange indeed if so celestial an article as freedom should not be highly rated. So it's going to cost a lot. Freedom isn't free. This is the kind of the original take on that from Thomas Paine in The American Crisis. Then he went into telling a story about some people who wanted to kind of kick the war off to a future day. Oh, I've got a kid, so give me peace in my day. And he said, instead, every good parent should really put it like this. If there must be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace. And he said, and this single reflection, well applied, is sufficient to awaken every man to duty. Like, I want to take, if you want to raise your kids or your grandkids, anyone down the line in a better society than what you live in, you take on all the pain and the suffering now. And Thomas Paine was hammering that home. He said, I am as confident as I am that God governs the world, that America will never be happy till she gets clear of foreign domination. He said, wars without ceasing will break out till that period arrives. Certainly they had lived through some of those wars in the past. And he said, and the continent must in the end be conqueror, for though the flame of liberty may sometimes cease to shine, the coal can never expire. So he's saying, like, even though it's not shining freedom today, we can get it lit again. We just got to get down to it. So then he concluded this kind of the first paragraph, going back up a little bit. He concluded the first paragraph that started out with, these are the times that try men's souls, with a reminder of what the revolution was all about, what the war for independence was all about, what the controversy between the colonies and Great Britain was all about, breaking free from unlimited centralized power in all cases whatsoever. And those of you who've watched or listened to the show for quite some time, you know where I'm going with this, because Paine put it like this. Britain, with an army to enforce her tyranny, has declared that she has a right not only to tax, but to bind us in all cases whatsoever. And if being bound in that manner is not slavery, then there is not such a thing as slavery upon earth. Even the expression is impious, for so unlimited a power can belong only to God. And Paine also described this in his 1782 letter to Abbe Raynal, what this was all about. What is this all cases whatsoever? Everyone at the time knew what he was talking about. Unfortunately, most people today have no clue what that's all about. But that was the underlying core issue of why they had to keep fighting on, because as long as they claimed power over the colonies in all cases whatsoever, it doesn't matter what deal they make, they still claim unlimited power, and they're going to use it at some point in the future. And he described it here in 1782. He said, the Stamp Act, it is true, was repealed in 2 years after it was passed, but it was immediately followed by one of infinitely more mischievous magnitude. I mean, the Declaratory Act, which asserted the right, as it was styled, of the British Parliament, quote, to bind America in all cases whatsoever. And just a quick recap, what went down was the people resisted, the people refused to comply, the colonies stopped participating in enforcement of the Stamp Act, and it created an environment where the Stamp Act couldn't be enforced. So the British Parliament, trying to save face, they repealed it in the face of all this resistance. But they couldn't just repeal it because they didn't want them to think that, well, the British were giving up their claim to power. So at the same time that they repealed it, they passed the Declaratory Act of 1766, reaffirming power over the colonies in all cases whatsoever. Even Benjamin Franklin was like, we know you did the same thing with the Irish. I think it was 1720, same language. And that in this time, you've never actually exercised that power. So this will probably quiet most people down. Not everybody. He certainly understood that that was a mistake some years later, and he also recognized that this claim of power in all cases whatsoever was going to be used over and over and over again. They certainly did that in the years between 1766 and 76. Anyways, Paine continued. If then the Stamp Act was a usurpation of the Americans' most precious and sacred rights, the Declaratory Act left them no rights at all and contained the full-grown seeds of the most despotic government ever exercised in the world. Worst in history is a government that claims power in all cases whatsoever. We're not too far off from that today, even though in each action, the government today has more power that you can play out, but certainly the underlying principle, that is massive. He said it placed America not only in the lowest, but in the basest state of vassalage because it demanded an unconditional submission in everything, or as the act expressed it, in all cases whatsoever. And he said, and what renders this act the more offensive is that it appears to have been passed as an act of mercy. Truly then, maybe it said that the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. And I think that's an excellent point. This was an act of mercy from the British. Okay, you guys are really upset about this Stamp Act, so we're going to get rid of it. But at the same time, they slapped this on, and some of the best Americans kind of fell for it at first. Not totally. Some people were kind of quieted. Others were wondering, well, how John Adams in his diary basically wrote, well, I wonder how they're going to use this. Well, they certainly saw how they were going to use it pretty quickly. So this was a reminder, this all cases whatsoever, of what this fight was really all about. And here's from an article I wrote on this last year. Paine then made the case that part of the reason they were having trouble is that the Patriots actually didn't want war in the first place. So they were struggling because they weren't clamoring for war. They were thrust into it. And here's how he continued. America did not, nor does not want force, but she wanted a proper application of that force. Wisdom is not the purchase of a day, and it is no wonder that we should err at the first setting off. Okay, yeah, we just kicked off this war. We've been fighting. We're really fighting back against them. We just declared independence some months ago, and we're struggling to get things rolling. We weren't ramping up to fight a war. We never wanted one in the first place. He said, from an excess of tenderness, we were unwilling to raise an army and trusted our cause to the temporary defense of a well-meaning militia. He said, a summer's experience has now taught us better. Yet with those troops, while they were collected, we were able to set bounds to the progress of the enemy, and thank God they are again assembling. So he's pointing out that fighting against regulars, the militia is a great first line of defense. That's very similar to what Henry Knox recommended to George Washington in his first presidency. The militia should be the first capital security of a free republic and not a standing army. You only call up a standing army in times of really, really important need. And Paine had a very similar take. I have always considered militia as the best troops in the world for a sudden exertion, but they will not do for a long campaign. In other words, keep the body of the people armed to deal with invasions and sudden attacks, and then call up the army to back them up moving forward, especially if you're fighting against well-seasoned veterans. Anyway, so Paine this is back to my article. Paine then continued with what I think is one of the greatest quotes in history, a rare thing today, being opposed to offensive wars and at the same time in support of the right to take up arms in self-defense. Most people who say, oh, I'm anti-war, they're also against the right to keep and bear arms. And people who tend to be in the favor of the right to keep and bear arms are okay with all kinds of foreign interventionism and things like that. That's kind of the general combination we see pretty often. There are some shifts in that, which is very positive. But Paine continued like this: "My own line of reasoning is to myself as straight and clear as a ray of light. Not all the treasures of the world, so far as I believe, could have induced me to support an offensive war, for I think it murder. Don't ever go on the offense to start a war. That's murder, that mass murder, according to Thomas Paine. But if you get attacked, you lay waste to these people." That's basically his mentality. He said, "But if a thief break into my house, burns and destroys my property, and kills or threatens to kill me, or those that are in it, and to bind me in all cases whatsoever to his absolute will, am I to suffer it?" Again, he harkens back to the Declaratory Act. They're killing us. They're burning things. They're taking control, and they're claiming power over you in all situations, all the time, for the rest of humanity. Should I suffer that? Absolutely not. Before getting to the rest of this here, I want to point out that everything I'm mentioning in this episode, I'm citing heavily from Thomas Paine's essay itself. But I've also got like that letter from George Washington to his cousin, plus the article that I wrote. And I've got another episode, I think, later here that you should check out as well. All this will be linked to in the show notes. Alan Mosley organizes a blog post for every episode that includes a show links section that goes through the reference links that I'm talking about, generally in the order that I do it in each episode. That way, rather than just scratching the surface like I am in this show, you can read it all in full, in context, on your own time. And you can learn way more than I'm talking about here today. That will be organized by Alan, and I will get it published a couple of hours after this live stream is done. That's over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. It's all spelled out, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I want to get right back into this. Next up, Thomas Paine gives us a bit of a precursor to some of the things that we have read from a guy like Lysander Spooner, asking rhetorically, really, if someone claims this kind of power to kill you and is they're going to burn down your house, kill the people in it, claims power over you in all cases whatsoever, it doesn't make a difference if they come from government or if they come from down the street. Doesn't matter if they're a king or a common man. Evil is evil. It doesn't matter who does it. You don't just all of a sudden get away with doing all kinds of crimes because you're government. Unfortunately, that's how most people treat things today. Well, but the government did it, so then it's okay. We have to ask the government if the government thinks it went too far. And Paine thought this was absurd. He said, "What signifies it to me whether he who does it is a king or a common man, my countrymen or not my countrymen, whether it be done by an individual villain or an army of them?" He said, "If we reason to the root of things, we shall find no difference. Neither can any just cause be assigned why we should punish in the one case and pardon in the other. When government commits crimes, it's much worse because a lot of people are begging for it. And most people are like, but, well, that's what they're supposed to be doing. Or we got to allow this to happen. You got to follow the process in order to change things around." And Paine acknowledged that this was a serious, serious mistake. Of course, he knew that taking this mentality, that if it comes from a king, it could still be criminal. It needs to be punished. He knew that they would call him a traitor and a rebel. He was fomenting a rebellion. But of course, he nailed it in response to this as well. One of my favorite quotes from him: "Let them call me rebel and welcome. I feel no concern from it." He said, "But I should suffer the misery of devils were I to make..." Man, he does not pull any punches. Let me go. "Let them call me rebel and welcome. I feel no concern from it. But I should suffer the misery of devils were I to make a whore of my soul by swearing allegiance to one whose character is that of a sottish, stupid, stubborn, worthless, brutish man." So he's like, okay, call me a rebel for railing on the king, but I am definitely not swearing allegiance to that stupid, worthless, brutish man. I will not whore myself out, said Thomas Paine. So from there, Paine then kind of launched into a bit of a united we stand, divided we fall kind of a message, which was a very old message, old phrase at the time. But the first real usage of it in modern times, from my understanding, was from Paine's fellow, well, eventually Pennsylvanian John Dickinson in maybe the first song of the American Revolution called the Liberty Song, which was published in 1788. And here's just a couple of phrases from that. Then join hand in hand, brave Americans all, by uniting we stand, by dividing we fall. In so righteous a cause, let us hope to succeed, for heaven approves of each generous deed. And here, right from the first verse, he said, come join hand in hand, brave Americans all, and rouse your bold hearts at fair liberty's call. No tyrannous acts shall suppress your just claim, or stain with dishonor America's name. If you guys are really interested, I think there's actually at least a short episode covering John Dickinson's Liberty Song and its impact during the Revolution. Let me know in the comments or an email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com, if you're interested in that. But anyways, Paine's United We Stand, he doesn't use that same phrase, but he put it like this. I turn with the warm ardor of a friend to those who have nobly stood and are yet determined to stand the matter out. I call not upon a few, but upon all. Not on this state or that state, but on every state. Up and help us. Lay your shoulders to the wheel. Better to have too much force than too little when so great an object is at stake. Man, powerful stuff from Thomas Paine. He continued with this. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and to repulse it. So again, he reminded people what was at stake. And again, we know that he was really hammering home that you can't make a deal with these people. You can't take the protection of Lord Howe because you're afraid. It doesn't matter what the odds are, because they still claim that power over us in all cases whatsoever. And this will not end well, even if it sounds nice in the short run. And he continued with this. There are cases which cannot be overdone by language, and this is one. In other words, there's nothing that I can say about this would be hyperbole. This is really, really a bad situation we're in. He said, there are persons, too, who see not the full extent of the evil which threatens them. They solace themselves with the hopes that the enemy, if he succeed, will be merciful. It is the madness of folly to expect mercy from those who have refused to do justice, and even mercy where conquest is the object. It's only a trick of war, he said. The cunning of the fox is as murderous as the violence of the wolf, and we ought to guard equally against both. I think that is one of the most timeless messages there's so many, but as I'm reading through this, it really hits me that so many people fall for the cunning of the fox, but ultimately government keeps growing and growing, year in and year out, no matter what anybody promises us. And he said that is as murderous as the violence of the wolf, because in the long run, it kind of plays out the same. So he closed it out with a call for fortitude and perseverance. He said, this is our situation, and who will may know it. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious issue. By cowardice and submission, the sad choice of a variety of evils. What are you going to get? Well, he's telling you, this is what's going to happen if you are a coward and you submit. He said, we'll have a ravaged country, a depopulated city, because they're going to come in and murder people and burn stuff down, habitations without safety, and slavery without hope, because political slavery is living in a situation where government has power over you in all cases whatsoever, until government determines that government did the wrong thing. Not much different than what we live under today, really, when people say that the only way to stop government is to ask the government to stop itself through new bums in office or through the court system or whatever. That is not much difference in practice. Anyways, habitations without slavery, without safety, slavery without hope, our homes turned into barracks and bawdy houses for Hessians, and a future race to provide for, whose fathers we shall doubt of. Man, he said, look on this picture and weep over it. And if there yet remains one thoughtless wretch who believes it not, let him suffer it unlamented. And he signed off, not with his name, but just with common sense, because at the beginning of 1776, January 10th, I believe was the date, he was famous for publishing Common Sense. It was the most widely read publication. It surpassed even John Dickinson's Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania from 1767, and he closed out December with the American Crisis. Jet Connor, over at All Things Liberty, the Journal of the American Revolution, he has a whole article. I'm only going to cite this one paragraph. He's got a whole article discussing the idea or the notion that George Washington ordered Paine's The Crisis read to his troops waiting there, and that's what rallied them. And Connor says, well, we don't actually have proof of this, that he did or that he didn't do that. Either way, we know it was widely published. It started out as a pamphlet on December 19th, and then it was published in the press, I think, the 23rd or 28th. It definitely got around, and the message is basically, it was on these words were on the mouths and minds and in the hearts of basically everyone. It certainly was a rallying cry. Anyways, he said, it is said that George Washington, this is again from Jet Connor, that George Washington ordered the first number of Thomas Paine's The American Crisis series to be read to his ragged troops before boarding boats to cross the Delaware on the eve of the Battle of Trenton. Inspired by Paine's words, so the story goes, the suffering soldiers marched through that cold and stormy night and achieved a much-needed victory the next morning at Trenton. Now, whether it played out exactly like that, or if this is just kind of a mythology or something, who knows? We don't know for sure, but we do know that many people recognize the impact of the American crisis. And again, from another article by Jet Connor, he said that Common Sense, January of 76, and The Crisis #1, December of 76, serve as bookends for that remarkable year in American history. The first, both from Paine, of course, the first urging a declaration of independence, and the second exhorting Americans to buckle down and achieve it. You couldn't have someone have more impact in 76, I think, than Thomas Paine. Here from Travis Shaw at American Battlefield Trust, he said their resolve renewed. So once people were fired up to fight on because they knew they had to, the battered but not broken Continental Army went back on the offensive, and this led to what they call the 10 Crucial Days. These saw Washington and his men victorious at Trenton and Princeton, forcing Howe to abandon much of New Jersey. And Travis continues, loyalists, emboldened by Howe's earlier success, now found themselves abandoned to the wrath of their patriot neighbors. Man, that was not looking good for them. As winter gave way to spring, new enlistments from throughout the colonies poured into Washington's army. So they were falling apart. Washington's like, the game is up if this doesn't really turn around quickly. Paine inspired people. They went in, got some victories, very surprising victories, really, if you think about it. And then new enlistments poured in, and that was the turning point. They still needed help along the way, but this was a big turning point from it was done in 6 months or less to it kept going and it turned into a victory. And that's how Travis basically put it. The military victories at Trenton and Princeton changed the course of the war in a strategic sense. But the American Crisis #1 provided the ideological motivation that made them possible. And no matter what team is in charge, we're once again living under, at least my whole life, the largest government in the history of the world, just like Thomas Paine was at that time in 1776. So I think the message really remains the same as it was in December of 76. The road is going to be bumpy but stay the course. And nothing helps us reach and teach more and more people with this essential foundational information, these essential historical stories and principles, more than the financial faith and support of our members. I hope you'll please consider joining us today. You can join us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out. $2 a month and up, whatever you choose. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Or if you prefer to just do a one-time gift, you can do that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. No pressure. We're going to continue doing the work that we do day in and day out, 365 days a year. Really, someone is always working here at the 10th Amendment Center. And we've got over 10,000 blogs and articles and podcasts and stuff on our website. So we're going to keep churning out this content, this important information, strategic advice as well on how to put it into practice. But I'd be very grateful to any consideration you can give to putting your financial faith behind our work today. Again, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. And with that, I want to say a quick but very huge thank you to a handful of people who have joined us as members lately. There's Howard in Tennessee, Clarissa in Alabama, Thomas in Oklahoma, James in Texas, Emma in New Jersey, and Chris in Texas. I'm so grateful for your support. I can't say thank you enough. You can also help us spread the word with a few free and easy peasy actions, especially on the mainstream platforms like leaving a review on Apple Podcast or any other podcast platform, comments in the archive, hitting the like button, subscribing, getting notifications, especially on the video platforms. The more watch time you have with one of our videos, the more they show it to more people. So throw it on in the background. Listen to it a couple of times, 2, 3, 4. I mean, if you just listen start to finish, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for you being interested in any of this information. I didn't really learn about any of this as I was growing up. So hopefully what I've learned along the way and I'm sharing with you is interesting. It's educational, more important than anything. I hope you learned something. I appreciate you being here, and I hope to see you next time on the path to liberty.